Today I will tell you a story that begins with a phone call. Not just any call, but the kind that pierces through the ordinary and shatters everything you believed about family, love, and loyalty. I remember it clearly. I was sitting in my Scottsdale office, a room lined with maps of the resorts I had built, when my phone rang. The number belonged to the wedding planner my daughter had hired. At first I thought it would be a routine conversation about flowers or music, but the moment she spoke, her tone gave her away. Her voice trembled, as though she carried a secret too heavy to hold. She said softly, almost whispering, "Your son-in-law removed you from the guest list, but insisted we keep the $50,000 deposit you paid for the venue, the catering, and the resort." Silence filled the space around me. The hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of papers on my desk, all of it faded. I could only hear the echo of those words, removed from my daughter's wedding. Erased, as if my existence brought shame. Yet my money, the fruit of my life's work, was still good enough to keep. I let the pause stretch long enough to make the planner uneasy. Then I spoke, my voice steady, my words deliberate. "Cancel the entire wedding." There was a gasp on the other end of the line, sharp and startled. "But ma'am, you are not the bride." I stood and walked to the wide window. The Arizona desert stretched before me, its red earth glowing under the morning sun. I felt its strength seep into me, ancient and unshakable. When I answered, my tone carried the weight of a truth she had not expected. "No, but I own the venue, the catering, and the resort." I could almost hear her heart skip a beat. For a moment she forgot to breathe. She knew the contracts. She knew the scope of my ownership. She realized that a woman they believed could be erased with one careless stroke of a pen held the strings to everything they had planned. That was the moment when the silence inside me broke. For years, I had chosen to remain quiet, believing that humility was strength. My empire, Carter Resorts and Hospitality, had grown from a single run-down lodge in Flagstaff into a network of luxury resorts stretching across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. I held shares in catering companies and hotel groups, pieces of businesses most people never knew I touched. And yet to my family, I was simply Mom. To some, just Grandma Evelyn, the woman who showed up with pies on Thanksgiving, who quietly wrote checks when bills grew heavy. I thought that was enough. I thought blending into the background was a kind of love. That by never demanding credit, I was giving my daughter space to shine. But silence, I learned in that moment, is not always strength. Sometimes it is mistaken for weakness, and weakness invites cruelty. As the planner stammered on the phone, unsure of what to say next, I stared at the desert horizon. The sun was rising higher, casting golden light across the dry land. It reminded me of the years I had spent building all this from nothing. Nights when I slept in my car because I had no money for a motel. Days when I juggled multiple jobs, waiting tables by night while learning contracts by day. I had sacrificed everything for stability, not only for myself, but for my daughter. And now I was being told I had no place at her wedding. I should have felt rage, but what I felt instead was something colder, a calm resolve that seeped into my bones. Betrayal has a way of burning hot at first, but if you have lived long enough, the fire turns into ice. It steadies you. It makes your voice sharper, your decisions clearer. "Cancel the wedding," I had said, and I meant it. The planner's hesitation told me she had never dealt with someone like me before. She thought I was just another mother of the bride, someone who cried in silence, someone who would beg to be invited back. She did not yet understand the difference between a guest and an owner, between someone hoping for permission and someone holding authority. I let her confusion linger. Then I ended the call without another word. The silence in the office after I set the phone down was heavier than before. I looked again at the maps on the wall. Each red pin marked a resort I had built or bought, each one a reminder of how far I had come. They thought they could erase me from one event, but they had built that very event on ground I owned. My son-in-law canceled my invite to my daughter's wedding. He did not know I owned the luxury resort chain. That truth was my shield and my sword. I felt my heart steady, my breath deepen. They had made their move. They believed I would accept humiliation in silence. They thought I was just a mother with gray hair, someone they could dismiss while pocketing her money. They had forgotten who I was. I turned away from the window and sat back at my desk. My hands did not tremble as I reached for a folder of contracts. My eyes were sharp, not clouded with tears. If they wanted me invisible, they would soon learn that an invisible woman, once forced into the light, can blind everyone who tried to look away. This was no longer about a wedding. It was about dignity, about justice, about reminding those who believe themselves clever that there is nothing more dangerous than underestimating someone who has been silent for too long. The phone call was only the beginning. The phone call ended, but the weight of its message pressed against my chest. I refused to sit quietly in confusion. I needed to know who had authorized such cruelty. I reached for my own contacts within the Carter Resorts network. When my assistant confirmed what I suspected, the truth hit me like a sharp blade. Michael had personally called the vendors one by one, speaking with a confidence that dripped with arrogance. He told them I was emotionally unstable, unpredictable, the kind of woman who might ruin a wedding with an outburst. His words were calculated to erase me not only from the guest list, but from my own daughter's trust. I could almost hear his voice repeating the lies. I pictured him leaning back in his leather chair, tone casual, masking poison with charm. To the florist, he said I was unreliable. To the hotel manager, he said it would be better if I were not present. To the catering company, he claimed I had a history of causing drama at social events. He painted me as a liability, a stain that must be scrubbed away. And the worst part was not the lie itself, but the ease with which he spoke it. I clenched my fist, forcing myself to stay still, though every instinct screamed to confront him immediately. Years of experience had taught me the value of patience. But inside, a fire ignited. Later that week, I found myself at my daughter's house. I stepped into the hallway, and before anyone noticed me, I heard voices coming from the living room. Michael's tone was sharp, commanding. He was speaking to his mother, Charlotte. "Evelyn doesn't belong in this kind of wedding," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's better she's kept away. Rachel needs a perfect ceremony, not her mother overshadowing it." Her words cut deeper than any insult I had endured in business negotiations. This was not a stranger attacking me. It was my daughter's soon-to-be mother-in-law, determined to erase me from a moment that should have been ours. Charlotte's tone carried the bitterness of a woman obsessed with image, terrified of imperfection. Michael added, "She doesn't understand boundaries. If she shows up, she'll make it about herself. That's why I told the vendors to remove her. She'll thank us later when everything goes smoothly." They both laughed softly, a cruel sound that wrapped around me like ice. I remained hidden, listening, my heart steadying itself against the storm. Then I heard a soft gasp. My daughter Rachel stood nearby, caught between loyalty and fear. She had overheard everything, just as I had. For a moment, I hoped she would speak, that she would defend me, that she would say, "She is my mother. She belongs there." But Rachel said nothing. She pressed her lips together, her eyes wide, and walked away in silence. Her silence was not neutral. It was consent. It was permission for them to continue their plan. I closed my eyes and let the truth settle. My money was welcome. My presence was not. My son-in-law and his mother were not only cutting me out, they were rewriting me as the villain, the problem to be removed. And my own daughter, my Rachel, stood by and allowed it. I refused to collapse under that realization. Instead, I let the betrayal sharpen me. Every lie they spread only confirmed what I already knew. They wanted the appearance of perfection, a flawless wedding crafted to impress their friends, investors, and social circles. And in their eyes, I was a flaw. They thought they could cut me away as if trimming the edge of a photograph. They believed they were clever. They believed no one would question them. But I was no ordinary mother, and I was certainly no disposable figure. I returned to my office that night with my heart pounding like a drumbeat of war. I laid out the contracts one by one, spreading them across the desk. Each contract bore my name, my authority, my control. They wanted me gone, but the truth was, They were standing on ground that I owned. Their perfect wedding was built on my foundation. I whispered to myself, steady and low, "They want my money, but not my face. They want my power, but not my presence." It was more than betrayal. It was theft of dignity. And in that moment, clarity struck me with precision. This was not about a wedding. It was about erasing me from the image of perfection they craved. They wanted photographs without me, speeches without my name, a celebration that pretended I did not exist. But they wanted every dollar I had given, every resource I controlled, every connection I had built. The desert outside my window glowed with the last light of the evening. Shadows stretched long across the earth, and I felt a strange kinship with them. They thought I was a shadow too, something they could ignore. But shadows lengthen, grow darker, and sooner or later cover everything. That night I did not cry. I did not rage. I sharpened my resolve. Michael had underestimated me. Charlotte had dismissed me. Rachel had failed me. They believed they had written the script, but they had forgotten the simplest truth. The stage they were standing on was mine. The betrayal had been revealed layer by layer, each word of theirs a knife. And now the knives had been turned. They wanted me invisible. They would soon learn what happens when the invisible becomes undeniable. 3 weeks before the phone call that changed everything, I sat at my daughter's dining table. The evening had been arranged as a simple family dinner, but I felt the tension the moment I walked in. Rachel moved about the kitchen, her hands busy, her smile bright but slightly forced. Michael stood close by, leaning against the counter with his arms folded. His mother, Charlotte, sat already at the table, her posture sharp, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk waiting for prey. The meal began with polite conversation. Plates were passed around, glasses filled with wine, silverware clinking gently. I kept my expression calm, watching, waiting. Then Rachel took a breath and announced, "Mom, we've finalized our wedding plans. We're going with the Phoenix Desert Resort. The ballroom, the gardens, everything. It's going to be perfect." Her voice carried excitement, almost childlike. I reached out and touched her hand, smiling warmly. "That sounds beautiful, sweetheart. I'd like to help cover the expenses. Consider it my gift to you." Before Rachel could respond, Michael leaned forward, his smile too polished, too rehearsed. "That's generous, Evelyn. But this is our wedding. We want to handle it ourselves. Your support is appreciated, of course, but let's not make it about money." His tone was light, but his eyes locked onto mine, sending a silent warning. He didn't want me involved beyond writing a check. I held his gaze. Behind that mask of humility, I saw his true intent. He wanted control. He wanted me silent, reduced to the role of financier with no voice, no presence. Rachel, sensing the tension, added quickly, "Mom, really, it's already handled. You've done so much for me over the years. I don't want you worrying." She meant well, but her words had the weight of rehearsed persuasion. I sat back, folding my napkin carefully, my mind racing. I had built a life where nothing was handed to me, every victory earned by resilience. Now, at my own daughter's table, I was being told my value was measured only in dollars, not in love, not in presence. Charlotte broke the silence with a laugh, low and deliberate. "Sometimes the best weddings," she said, her eyes sliding toward me, "are the ones where certain people step aside. It keeps things elegant, free from unnecessary distractions." The fork in my hand stilled. Her words were coated in sweetness, but the dagger was unmistakable. I was the distraction she spoke of. I was the flaw in the perfect image she wanted to parade before her friends. Rachel's face flushed. She pretended not to hear. Michael smirked, lifting his glass as if Charlotte's poison was a toast. I smiled too, but mine was different. Calm, precise, with just enough curve to hide the steel in my eyes. "Elegance," I said softly, "is rarely about who steps aside. It's about who has the courage to stand where they belong." For a moment, the table fell silent. Michael's smile faltered just slightly. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. Rachel looked between us, trapped, uncertain. I returned to my meal, chewing slowly, refusing to let their words pierce deeper than I allowed. Inside, however, I was cataloging every glance, every phrase, every smirk. They thought they had set the stage that evening, but what they didn't realize was that I was already taking notes for the battle to come. Michael cleared his throat, changing the subject to seating charts and floral arrangements. He spoke quickly, filling the air with details, drowning out the tension. Rachel nodded along, eager to keep the peace. Charlotte added her preferences, dismissing anything she found beneath her standards. I listened, offering no more opinions. Each of them believed my silence meant surrender. What they didn't understand was that silence can be the sharpest weapon when wielded with patience. I looked around the table at the people who believed they had outmaneuvered me. Rachel, too easily swayed. Michael, drunk on his own ambition. Charlotte, clinging to her obsession with appearances. They were writing a story without me, convinced I would never hold the pen. But as I raised my glass and let the wine touch my lips, my eyes locked on Michael's. The message was clear. You may think you've buried me in the shadows, but I am watching. I am waiting. And when the moment comes, I will not whisper. I will strike. The dinner ended with hugs and polite farewells, the kind that look normal to outsiders but feel like theater to those inside the play. I kissed my daughter's cheek, whispered that I loved her, and walked out into the night air. The desert sky stretched wide above me, stars glittering like reminders of battles fought long before mine. I smiled again, not out of joy, but out of certainty. Their dinner had been a performance, a carefully staged deception meant to push me aside. They thought I had accepted the role they handed me. They thought wrong. That night, I returned home, sat at my desk, and opened the folder of contracts I had begun collecting over the years. Every page reminded me of who I truly was. Not just a mother, not just a grandmother, but a woman who had built an empire. The dinner was their move. My silence was mine. And soon, the board would turn. I decided I would not wait for rumors to grow or for whispers to turn into accepted truths. I walked into Michael's office unannounced, my heels striking against the polished floor with a rhythm that echoed through the building. He looked up from his desk, surprised at first, but then leaned back in his chair with that same smug smile he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. I stood in front of him, my voice sharp, leaving no room for misunderstanding. You erased me from my daughter's wedding while keeping my money? He didn't flinch. He folded his hands together, pretending to consider my words. Then, with a smirk, tugging at the corner of his mouth, he said, It was a gift. Gifts don't come with strings. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his, my tone colder than ice. Then consider this, Michael. Gifts can also disappear. His laugh filled the office, low and dismissive. He enjoyed this moment, the illusion that he was in control. He waved a hand toward the contracts scattered across his desk, as if swatting away an insect. By the time you try, Evelyn, it'll be too late. The wedding will be flawless, and you'll be nothing more than a footnote we managed to keep out of the picture. I didn't blink. I wanted him to see in my eyes what he had awakened. I had spent years negotiating with men who thought condescension was a weapon, men who thought women didn't belong in boardrooms or on contracts. They had all underestimated me, and so did he. You believe you've written me out, I said, keeping my voice calm, each word measured. But you've mistaken silence for surrender. That mistake has destroyed stronger men than you. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You're not hearing me. This isn't your show. Rachel is marrying me, not you. She wants elegance, not complications. And frankly, Evelyn, you are a complication. The words sliced through the air like a blade. I let it hang there, refusing to flinch, refusing to give him the satisfaction of reaction. You think erasing me from the guest list makes me vanish? I asked. You think keeping my money while locking the door on me proves power? You're mistaking theft for victory. He chuckled again, shaking his head. You talk like you're in some kind of courtroom, but this isn't business. It's family, and in family, perception is everything. Once the wedding begins, once the guests arrive, no one will remember who signed the checks. They'll only see what I let them see. I studied him. His arrogance was not careless. It was strategic. He truly believed image was stronger than truth. He thought appearances could bury reality. I straightened, my voice firm and unwavering. I built Carter resorts from nothing. I turned deserts into destinations. Do you really think I will let a man who married into my family erase me as though I never existed? He narrowed his eyes, the smile slipping just slightly, but he quickly recovered. You'll try, and when you fail, you'll finally understand you've reached the end of your influence. Times change, Evelyn. You can't control everything forever. That was his tell. He feared my control, feared the reach I had, feared that the quiet grandmother he mocked still held more power than he could ever imagine. I stepped closer, my shadow falling across his desk. You've made a grave mistake, Michael. You think your lies are walls strong enough to keep me out, but walls built on deceit crumble faster than you realize. His jaw tightened, but he forced another smirk. Then by all means, try to crumble mine. You'll only embarrass yourself. For a long moment, we locked eyes. It was not just a confrontation between a mother-in-law and her son-in-law. It was a duel between truth and deception, between earned authority and borrowed arrogance. He wanted me to lash out, to lose composure. Instead, I gave him silence, a silence sharper than any words. Finally, I turned toward the door. My voice, calm but cutting, filled the space as I walked away. Enjoy your illusion while it lasts, because soon you'll realize the ground you stand on was never yours to claim. I left his office without another glance. My pulse was steady, not frantic. My anger had hardened into resolve. He had confirmed everything I needed to know. He didn't only want me gone, he wanted to humiliate me, to replace me in my own daughter's life with a crafted image of perfection that left no room for truth. As I stepped outside, the desert heat struck my face, and I welcomed it. The sun blazed across the horizon, fierce and unyielding. It mirrored what I felt inside. They had underestimated me, mistaking my generosity for weakness, but they were about to learn that I was not the woman they thought they could erase. Michael's arrogance had revealed itself in full. His words, calculated, cold, dripping with disdain, would come back to haunt him. He believed time was on his side. He believed the wedding would seal me out. But time had always been my ally, not his. I walked to my car, the words echoing in my mind like a vow. Gifts can also disappear. And soon, so would his illusion of control. I drove to Rachel's house after leaving Michael's office. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, every mile sharpening my resolve. I could not fight this war from a distance. I needed to see my daughter, to look into her eyes and find out whether she truly believed the lies her fiancé had been spreading. When I arrived, Rachel opened the door slowly, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with red as if she had already been crying. She stepped aside, letting me in, but she did not meet my gaze. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a weight pressing down on every room. I sat down in the living room, but she remained standing, wringing her hands together, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. I studied her carefully. This was my daughter, the girl I had raised with everything I had, the one I had carried through storms and losses. And yet, in that moment, she looked like a stranger, fragile, uncertain, caught between fear and duty. Finally, she whispered, "Mom, please, I just want a perfect wedding. Michael says you'd bring stress." The words landed like a knife. My heart ached, but my voice stayed firm. I leaned forward, my tone sharp enough to cut through her trembling. Stress or truth? Her head jerked slightly at the word. Truth. It was the one thing Michael and Charlotte had been working so hard to bury, and Rachel, my own daughter, was standing by while they did it. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her eyes filled with tears, her lips quivered, and then she turned her face away. Silence. That silence screamed louder than any answer she could have given. I rose to my feet, forcing her to look at me. "Rachel, I carried you through life with these hands. I built every opportunity you have today, and now because Michael whispers poison into your ear, you think I am unworthy of standing beside you on your wedding day?" She shook her head quickly, her voice breaking. "No, Mom, it's not that. It's just, he says it would be easier without complications. He says you might make things harder, that people might misunderstand." I cut her off. "Easier for who? For him? For Charlotte? Or for you, so you don't have to choose between your husband and your mother?" Her silence returned, heavier this time. I stepped closer, my voice colder now. "You want a perfect wedding, Rachel. Perfection is not measured by flowers or table settings. It is measured by the people who stand by your side, the ones who bled for you, who built you, and if you allow them to erase me, then your perfection is nothing but a lie." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she said nothing. She did not defend me. She did not defend herself. She only stood there, broken by fear, paralyzed by the pressure of Michael's control and Charlotte's demands. I saw in her the weakness of someone who wanted peace at any cost, even if it meant betraying the one who had given her everything. That weakness was more painful than Michael's arrogance or Charlotte's cruelty. Because betrayal from outsiders can be endured, but betrayal in silence from your own child cuts to the soul. I steadied my breath, refusing to let her see me falter. "Your silence is your choice, Rachel, and your choice is your answer." She covered her face with her hands and wept quietly. But still, she did not speak. She did not say, "Come, Mom, you belong with me." She let the silence confirm what I already knew. I turned toward the door, my steps steady, each one echoing like a verdict. Before leaving, I stopped and said, "One day you will understand the cost of silence, and when that day comes, you will remember this moment, when you chose to stand still while others tried to erase your own mother." I walked out, closing the door behind me, leaving her in tears. My heart burned, not with sorrow, but with resolve. She had made her choice. Michael had his claws deep in her, and Charlotte's shadow loomed over every decision. Rachel was lost, at least for now. But I was not lost. I had clarity. The betrayal of my daughter's silence hardened me more than Michael's words. Because now I understood exactly what I was facing. They wanted me erased. They wanted me invisible. And my own daughter's silence had given them permission. As I stood in the desert night outside her house, I felt the wind against my face, dry and relentless. It carried the scent of dust and stone, the reminder of a land that had shaped me. This land did not bow. It endured storms, heat, drought, and still stood strong. So would I. Rachel's silence had spoken volumes. She was too weak to defend me, but I was strong enough to defend myself, and I would not only defend, I would strike back. I drove away, the headlights cutting through the darkness, every mile sharpening the vow in my mind. They believed I was outnumbered. They believed I had been silenced, but I had built empires alone before, and I would tear apart their illusions with the same resolve. Rachel may have been lost, but I was not. I had not come this far in life to be erased by arrogance, by vanity, or by fear. They thought I would accept being written out. They thought wrong. The morning after I confronted Rachel, I returned to my office determined to gather myself, but the fight came to me instead. Charlotte Hayes showed up uninvited, sweeping through the front doors of my resort as if she owned it. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, her chin held high, her expression sharp with judgment. I didn't ask her to sit when she entered my office. I wanted her to stand, to know that her presence was neither welcome nor intimidating. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "This isn't your show, Evelyn," she said, her voice firm, laced with disdain. "Rachel's wedding is a chance for our family to shine. Step back, or you'll ruin everything." I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping slowly against the desk. Her words were expected, but the venom behind them was stronger than I anticipated. She didn't see me as part of the family. She saw me as an obstacle to be cleared away. "Your family?" I asked, my tone cool, each word deliberate. Rachel is my daughter. This wedding is not your stage, Charlotte, and it is certainly not yours to dictate who belongs." Her lips curved into a bitter smile. "You don't understand, do you? I've seen what happens when appearances are ruined. When I was a young woman, I attended a wedding in Dallas. My dress was plain, my shoes borrowed, and people laughed. They whispered behind their hands, pointing, mocking me. I swore that day I would never be humiliated again, not me, not my family. And I will not allow you, your outdated clothes, your blunt manners, your presence, to drag Rachel into the same shame I endured." So that was it. Her cruelty had roots. She had been wounded once, scarred by humiliation, and now she lived her life desperately erasing any trace of imperfection. I almost pitied her, almost. "You built your life on fear," I said, rising to my feet. "You let humiliation rule you. But I did not. I built an empire while you built excuses. Let's see who truly belongs." Her eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. "You call it an empire. I call it arrogance. Do you think people will respect you for waving money in their faces? No. They will respect restraint, dignity, poise, qualities you lack. Rachel knows this. Michael knows this. That's why they don't want you there." I stepped around the desk, closing the space between us. "Do not confuse my silence for weakness, Charlotte. I never needed to flaunt wealth because the world already knows my name. Carter Resorts didn't rise because I begged for acceptance. They rose because I refused to bow. Meanwhile, you've spent your life bowing to the opinions of strangers." She inhaled sharply, her shoulders stiffening. But her pride forced her to stand taller, to keep pushing. "Your name will not save you here. This wedding is about appearances, and appearances matter more than truth. If you love Rachel, if you truly care for her, you will step aside. Otherwise, she will be remembered as the bride whose mother embarrassed her." I shook my head, almost laughing at the absurdity. Embarrassed her? By what? Standing beside her, loving her, supporting her? The only embarrassment here is the way you've poisoned her with your obsession for perfection. You call it elegance. I call it cowardice. Her voice rose, her composure slipping. "You think you're untouchable. But I will make sure that on that day you are invisible. My friends, my community, they will never see you. They will see us, and we will shine without you." The air between us was electric, charged with the weight of unspoken battles. I held her gaze, my tone cutting through her fury. "You can try to erase me, Charlotte, but tell me this. What happens when the walls you built crack, when the lies collapse? Who will you be then? Just a woman still hiding from whispers at a wedding decades ago." Her face twisted, a flicker of the old humiliation flashing across her features. For one moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the insecure girl she still carried inside, but it hardened quickly into defiance. "I will protect my son and my family's image at any cost," she hissed. "And I will protect my daughter," I answered, steady and unwavering. "The difference is that I fight for her, not for my pride. That is why, in the end, I will stand and you will fall." The silence that followed was deafening. She searched my face, perhaps looking for a crack, a weakness, something she could exploit, but she found none. Finally, she turned sharply on her heel and stormed out of my office, her perfume lingering like the stench of a battlefield after smoke clears. I stood there, breathing slowly, letting the moment sink in. Charlotte had shown me her cards, her obsession, her fear, her willingness to cut me out completely to maintain her illusion of control. She thought her scars gave her justification. To me, they were nothing but excuses dressed as elegance. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I opened the folder of contracts again, flipping through them with precise focus. Every document reminded me of the truth. She might fight for appearances, but I held the foundation. She wanted me invisible. I was about to make myself undeniable. As the desert sun poured into the room, I whispered to myself, "Let them try. Let them believe they have already won. The show hasn't even begun." I refused to let Charlotte's venom linger in my mind. Her words were meant to frighten me into silence, but instead they hardened my resolve. I picked up the phone and called my attorney, David Harris, a man who had stood by me through decades of acquisitions. Within the hour, he and my senior assistant, Clara, were sitting across from me at my conference table. I spread out the contracts like playing cards, each one representing a piece of the puzzle. My voice was steady. I want every clause reviewed, every signature traced. If they believe they can cut me out, I want to know exactly where they'll hit the wall. David adjusted his glasses, scanning the papers with a practiced eye. Clara clicked through her laptop, pulling up spreadsheets of holdings and vendor lists. The room buzzed with quiet determination, the kind of rhythm I thrived in. "Start with the resort," I said. David nodded. "Phoenix Desert Resort, fully owned by Carter Resorts and Hospitality. You are the majority shareholder. There's no move they can make without your signature." I leaned back, satisfaction flickering in my chest. "And the hotel block for the guests?" Clara answered quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The rooms were reserved through Sunset Hospitality Group. You hold 41% of their shares. Technically, no event can be hosted without board approval if contested by a primary investor." I allowed myself a thin smile. "Good. What about catering?" David turned another page. "Elite Catering and Events. 5 years ago, you purchased controlling interest during their expansion. You hold 55%. Every contract they sign requires your silent approval, even if most don't realize it." The weight of the truth filled the room. I tapped the edge of the papers with one finger, steady and sharp. "So let's summarize. The venue, the catering, the hotel, all run through me." Clara looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "Evelyn, do you realize what this means? The Hayes family thinks they've arranged the entire wedding, but in reality, every piece of it is tied directly to you. They believe they're holding the reins, but you control the horse." I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the expanse of desert stretching into the horizon. Exactly. They think they've erased me, but they've built their illusion on my foundation. Every dollar, every service, every signed agreement, mine. David's tone was cautious. "You could cancel everything right now if you chose. One phone call and the wedding collapses." I turned back, my eyes cold but determined. Not yet. Cancellation would give them the excuse they want. They would call me bitter, vindictive, unstable. No. What I will do is wait. I will let them walk into their perfect day, believing they've won. And then, when the weight of truth drops, they will have no defense. They will be exposed, not me. Clara exchanged a glance with David, but neither argued. They knew better than to question the instincts that had built Carter Resorts into an empire. I gathered the contracts into a neat stack and pressed my palm against them. These papers are not just ink and signatures. They are the steel framework under the glass walls of their illusion, and I hold the framework. The thought of Michael's smug smile replayed in my mind. His arrogance, his certainty that by the time I acted it would be too late. He believed appearances were stronger than reality. But reality always finds a way to break through. I pictured Charlotte speaking about her humiliation in Dallas, her obsession with keeping me invisible. She thought appearances would shield her from whispers. But whispers could never destroy me. I had faced storms louder than gossip, betrayals deeper than hers, and I had always come out standing. I looked at David and Clara, my voice firm. "We'll hold position for now, but I want contingency letters drafted to each vendor, quietly. If I give the word, they will know where to stand." David nodded. "Consider it done." Clara closed her laptop, her face serious. "Evelyn, when they realize who they've been crossing, it won't just be a shock. It will be devastation." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "Good. Sometimes devastation is the only teacher people will listen to." The meeting ended, and I sat alone for a moment longer. The contracts lay in front of me, silent but powerful. This was my shield and my sword, proof that their arrogance had blinded them to reality. I whispered to myself, "They think I am powerless. They think they've stripped me away. But when the day comes, they'll learn the truth. They were never in control. I was. The desert sun blazed against the glass, unrelenting, merciless. I drew strength from it. The battle was no longer about being invited. It was about reminding them that the ground beneath their feet was mine. The tables had turned. They just didn't know it yet. The storm broke sooner than I expected. My phone buzzed with messages from Clara, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I knew exactly how the dominoes were falling. At that very hour, inside the rehearsal hall at the Phoenix Desert Resort, the Hayes family was learning the cost of arrogance. Vendors began calling them one by one. First, the florist, then the catering service, then the resort manager himself. Each call carried the same chilling message. Services canceled, contracts voided, deposits frozen under corporate review. Charlotte's shrill voice carried through the hall like glass shattering. "What do you mean canceled? You can't just pull out at the last second." Her face flushed red as she clutched the phone with trembling fingers. On the other side of the table, Michael slammed his fist down so hard the silverware rattled. "This is Evelyn. She's pulling strings behind our backs. She's trying to humiliate us." Rachel sat between them, her hands shaking around the rehearsal bouquet. Tears spilled down her cheeks, ruining the makeup trial she had begged the stylist to perfect that morning. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Mom wouldn't do this. She wouldn't." But her words lacked conviction. Michael snapped, pointing a finger at her. "Your mother is sabotaging us, Rachel. Open your eyes. She's bitter, jealous, and unstable. I told you this would happen." Rachel flinched as though struck. Her silence was worse than denial. It was fear. Across the room, vendors who had arrived for final confirmations quietly packed their bags. The coordinator from Elite Catering muttered apologies, avoiding eye contact. The florist wheeled out half-finished arrangements. The resort manager cleared his throat before addressing Michael directly. "Sir, without proper authorization, we cannot proceed. The decision has come from above. There's nothing we can do." Michael lunged from his chair, his face twisted with rage. "From above? Who? Who the hell is making these decisions?" The manager only shook his head. "I'm sorry, that information is confidential." Charlotte's fury boiled over. She gripped Michael's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "I knew it. She's behind this. Evelyn Carter doesn't belong in this family, and now she's proving it. She'll ruin everything unless we stop her." Rachel covered her face with both hands, sobbing. "Please stop. This is supposed to be my wedding, not a war." Michael's voice was sharp and merciless. "It is a war, Rachel. Your mother declared it, and if you don't choose a side, she'll destroy us both." The rehearsal hall spiraled into chaos. Parents argued in corners. Bridesmaids exchanged anxious whispers, wondering if there would even be a wedding. The band, who had come for their sound check, quietly packed their instruments and left through the side door. Every detail Rachel had dreamed of, every ribbon, every centerpiece, every carefully arranged plan, crumbled in real time. And I wasn't even in the room. I sat in my office across town, sipping tea while the sun dipped behind the desert mountains. Clara's updates pinged on my phone, each one confirming what I already knew. Panic had set in. The Hayes family was unraveling, and they had no idea that every thread they clutched was tied directly to me. Back in the resort, Charlotte screamed at the retreating florist. "Come back here, we paid you!" The florist turned, her voice steady but firm. "No, ma'am, she paid us." Then she walked out, leaving Charlotte speechless for the first time in years. Michael's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. He turned to Rachel, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You wanted a perfect wedding. Now look at it. This is what happens when your mother interferes. She'll never let us be free of her shadow." Rachel's sobs quieted into broken breaths. Her eyes, red and swollen, searched for answers in faces that offered none. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she would finally see through Michael's lies. But fear still chained her. The rehearsal ended not with music or laughter, but with slammed doors and shattered illusions. Guests who had flown in early for the rehearsal dinner were left milling in confusion. some whispering, others openly staring at the spectacle of a family imploding. Charlotte collapsed into a chair, clutching her pearls as though they might steady her racing heart. "She's turned the entire industry against us," she hissed. "How much power does she really have?" Michael didn't answer. He stared at his phone, scrolling furiously through unanswered calls and emails. His mask of arrogance cracked just slightly, revealing the unease underneath. Rachel, pale and trembling, whispered into the silence. "If Mom really did this, maybe it's because she had the power all along." Michael whipped his head toward her, his eyes narrowing. "Don't you dare take her side. Not now. Not after what she's done." But Rachel said nothing more. Her silence spoke louder than any defense she might have offered. I knew that by the time the dust settled, the Hayes family would finally begin to suspect the truth. But suspicion was not enough. They needed to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet before they would understand who had been holding them up all along. And so I waited, calm and certain, as the rehearsal collapsed into ashes. The rehearsal had collapsed in flames of chaos, but I knew Michael wasn't done. Men like him never admitted defeat. They simply shifted the battlefield. Late that evening, while the desert sky turned black and the cicadas sang, my phone buzzed. A text appeared, short and venomous, dripping with arrogance. "Stop being dramatic. You're not coming. The money stays. We'll talk when you calm down." I read it twice, the corners of my lips curving into a faint smile, the audacity, the certainty. He still believed he was the one holding power. He thought I was lashing out emotionally, that I was unstable, like he had told vendors and whispered to Rachel. To him, my silence looked like surrender. But to me, it was perfect. I set the phone down on my desk and leaned back in my chair. His words weren't just insulting. They were revealing. In one sentence, he laid bare his entire strategy. He would keep me away, keep the money, and gaslight me into believing I had lost. He wanted control over perception, not reality. And that was exactly where he had miscalculated. The tea beside me had gone cold, but I lifted the cup anyway, savoring the bitter taste as if it were victory already brewing. My thoughts sharpened, steel against stone. Now he thinks I'm powerless. Perfect. I could almost hear his voice in the text, dripping with condescension. "Stop being dramatic," as if my concerns were theatrics, as if my absence at my own daughter's wedding were a scene I invented. That single line burned more than an insult. It was dismissal, the kind of cold disregard that cuts deeper than rage. I imagined him sending it, smirking, maybe showing Charlotte and earning her approval, maybe even flaunting it in front of Rachel to remind her who controlled the narrative. He believed words on a screen could cage me. He forgot that I held contracts in my hands that could dismantle his illusion in a heartbeat. Clara had texted me earlier with updates about the fallout. "Vendors are shaken, but loyal. They're waiting for your signal." I hadn't responded yet. I didn't need to rush. Timing was my greatest weapon, and Michael's arrogance had just handed me the element of surprise. I picked the phone back up, rereading the message slowly, almost savoring the cruelty of it. "The money stays." He thought he could decide where my investments lived, as if I had handed him a gift that no longer belonged to me. He had no idea that the money wasn't gone. It was tethered to the very strings I now controlled. I typed no reply. Silence was louder. Silence would make him restless. Men like Michael needed control affirmed. Their words answered with obedience. When obedience did not come, paranoia followed, and paranoia would rot him from the inside long before my next move ever reached him. I stood and walked to the window, watching the lights of the resort glitter faintly in the distance. They were flickering, just as the Hayes family's illusion was flickering. To guests and outsiders, it still looked like a palace waiting for a wedding. But inside, everything was collapsing. Florists gone, catering withdrawn, contracts frozen. His arrogance kept him blind. That blindness was my shield. I spoke aloud, to no one, my voice low but cutting. "You erased me from my daughter's wedding while keeping my money? Then consider this. Money can disappear, and so can illusions." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I thought of Rachel, her tear-streaked face during the rehearsal, the way she whispered that she wanted a perfect wedding. Michael had convinced her that I was the source of stress, the disruption in her carefully curated dream. But soon, the dream itself would fracture, and she would see who had truly pulled it apart. Charlotte's voice echoed in my memory, her shrill insistence that appearances mattered more than truth. She would cling to that delusion until it strangled her. And Michael would double down, growing crueler as the walls closed in. Their arrogance was my weapon. Their blindness was my ally. I turned back to the desk, laying the phone face down. The message was still there, waiting, a permanent record of his contempt. It would serve as evidence later, proof of his arrogance when the tables finally turned. I whispered to myself again, calm and assured. He thinks I'm powerless. Perfect. And with that, I began drafting my next move. Michael's text was the spark, but my silence was the fuse. I didn't move recklessly. I had waited too long, built too much, to waste my power on a tantrum. Men like him wanted me loud and hysterical. They wanted evidence to call me bitter and unstable. Instead, I would be calm, deliberate, surgical. The first step was the vendors. I called each one directly, my tone even and controlled. Clara sat beside me, taking notes as I spoke. "Not yet," I told the florist. "You will hold. No cancellations, no explanations. If the Hayes family calls, you tell them everything is fine." To the caterer, I gave the same instruction. Serve them rehearsed smiles. Tell them the paperwork is moving forward, but do not, under any circumstances, prepare a single plate without my signature. The hotel manager hesitated, his voice cautious over the line. "Mrs. Carter, with all respect, this could get very messy." I allowed a thin smile to cross my face. Messy is what they deserve. Let them bask in their illusion for as long as possible. And when the day comes, when their guests are seated, and their pride is at its highest, I want every card to fall at once. Do you understand? "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. By the time I ended the last call, Clara was staring at me with wide eyes. "Evelyn," she said, her voice almost reverent, "you're staging the entire thing like a performance." I leaned back, folding my hands together. "Exactly. They wanted me invisible. Now I'll make sure they can't look away." I saw it all clearly in my mind, the perfect stage. The flowers delivered late, not early. The catering trucks rolling in half empty. The hotel staff standing at the doors, waiting for my word. On the surface, everything would look pristine, untouched. But beneath it, the machinery would stall, waiting for me to flip the switch. Michael thought he had erased me. Charlotte thought she had silenced me. Even Rachel, in her silence, had believed I was powerless. None of them understood that I wasn't erasing their wedding. I was rewriting it. Clara broke the silence. "Do you want me to draft the contingency letters?" I shook my head. "No letters. No paper trail. This stays verbal, between trusted voices only. If Michael somehow catches wind, he'll twist it into another weapon. I want no proof until the moment of truth." She nodded, her pen hovering nervously over her notepad. "Then what's the final play?" I stood and walked to the window again, staring out at the desert night. The horizon glowed faintly with the lights of Phoenix, but the resort's silhouette stood darker against the sky, waiting like a stage behind the curtain. "The final play," I said slowly, "is to give them exactly what they asked for. They wanted me absent, irrelevant, erased. Fine, I'll grant them that illusion. But when the lights go up, when every eye is watching, the entire room will see whose name is written on the walls, not theirs, mine." I turned back to Clara, my expression sharp. "Do you know why this matters?" She hesitated. "Because they tried to take your place?" "Because they tried to take my dignity," I corrected. "Money is replaceable. Deposits are numbers on paper. But dignity, when someone tries to strip that away, you do not let them. You remind them whose foundation they stand on, and you do it so thoroughly they never dare again." David, my attorney, had warned me about escalation. But this wasn't escalation. This was precision, and precision was my language. That night, I sat alone in my study, files spread out before me like chess pieces. My late husband's photograph rested on the desk, his eyes watching me from another lifetime. I whispered to him, soft but certain, "They think I'm the villain. They think I'm petty, but I am simply the truth they cannot bury." For a moment, I let myself feel the ache, the sting of being cut out of my daughter's life, of seeing Rachel shrink beneath Michael's shadow. But I locked it away again. There would be time to heal later. Tonight was for strategy. I wrote one line in my notebook, bold and final: "Hold until the day. Strike when they cannot look away." Clara collected the documents as I closed the notebook. "You're really going to wait until the wedding?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my tone sharp with finality. "Because control is not just about what you can do, it's about when you choose to do it." The plan was set. The silence would stretch until it strangled them with uncertainty. And then, when pride was highest, when appearances mattered most, their collapse would be absolute. I leaned back, my voice low and steady. They wanted me gone. Instead, I'll be unforgettable. The morning of the wedding broke hot and bright, the Arizona sun merciless above the desert. Guests began arriving in elegant dresses and tailored suits, their cars winding up the long drive toward the Phoenix Desert Resort. From the outside, the property gleamed like a palace, every window polished, every stone walkway glowing under the light. But inside, the machinery had stopped. The first signs of collapse came quietly. Guests stepped out of their cars expecting bellhops, only to find no one waiting. Suitcases piled by the doors, confusion spreading as travelers looked around for help. Inside the lobby, there were no front desk staff to check them in. Families wandered with garment bags and frustration, muttering to each other. Then came the second wave, the dining hall. Long tables had been set, white linens crisp and untouched, but not a single tray of food appeared. The kitchen was silent. No chefs, no servers, not even a coffee urn steaming in the corner. Guests whispered louder now, some pulling out their phones to call the wedding coordinator, others shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all. Charlotte Hayes was the first to crack. She rushed into the lobby, her face pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. Her voice carried across the marble. "How could this happen?" she demanded, clutching the pearls at her throat. "Where is the staff? Where is everyone?" A groomsman shrugged helplessly. "The hotel said our rooms weren't confirmed. They told half of us to wait outside. They don't even have the reservation numbers in the system." Charlotte spun, her heels clicking sharply as she shouted to no one in particular. "Unacceptable! This is supposed to be flawless! This is supposed to be perfect!" Meanwhile, Michael stormed into the empty banquet hall, his fists clenched. He yanked the tablecloth of the head table, sending glassware crashing to the floor. Guests gasped. Rachel trailed behind him in her silk robe, her eyes already red with tears. "This is Evelyn!" Michael roared, his voice echoing. He slammed his hands against the table so hard the sound rattled the room. "This is her doing! Find her! Find Evelyn!" Guests exchanged uneasy glances, whispers darting like sparks through the crowd. Some knew me by name, others were only just learning it, but the weight of his accusation only made the chaos sharper. Rachel collapsed into a chair, trembling. "Michael, stop, please. This is humiliating." He rounded on her, his eyes blazing. "Humiliating? Humiliating is letting your mother destroy us. She thinks she can play games with me, but she has no idea who she's dealing with." Charlotte appeared at his side, wringing her hands, her composure unraveling. "We can fix this. Call someone. Order catering from anywhere. Michael cut her off with a vicious snarl. "It's too late for that. The guests are already here. Everything's falling apart because of her." I chose that moment to arrive. The doors of the resort opened, and I stepped inside, dressed in a simple but commanding black gown. No glitter, no jewels, just clean lines and quiet strength. My heels struck the floor with deliberate rhythm as every head turned. The whispers ceased, the air tightening with suspense. Charlotte's jaw dropped, her fury freezing into shock. Michael's rage stuttered into silence for a heartbeat before reigniting. "You!" he spat, his voice sharp enough to cut. "You did this!" I paused in the center of the room, surveying the chaos, the unseated guests, the empty tables, the broken glass glittering on the floor. My expression remained calm, my voice steady. "I told you once," I said, letting each word strike like a hammer. "Gifts can disappear. Illusions can disappear, and today you will learn exactly what that means." Charlotte lunged forward, her voice cracking. "How dare you walk in here like this? This is Rachel's day, not yours." I turned my gaze on her, sharp and unflinching. "You were so concerned with appearances that you forgot the foundation beneath them. That foundation is me. This resort, this catering, these hotels, they were never yours to claim. They were always mine." A ripple went through the crowd. Guests whispered louder now, recognition dawning. Some gasped, others looked between me and the Hayes family with wide, shocked eyes. Michael tried to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. "You think anyone cares about your little empire? You think you can just waltz in here and ruin everything?" I took a step closer, my voice colder now. "I don't need to ruin anything. You've done that yourself. I simply stepped back and let the truth reveal itself. And now the truth is clear. You tried to erase me, but you cannot erase the ground you stand on." Rachel covered her mouth, tears spilling as she looked between us. For a brief second, guilt flashed across her face, as though she finally understood what her silence had cost. Charlotte shook her head, her voice shrill. "You're jealous. That's all this is. A bitter old woman who couldn't stand to be left out." I met her gaze evenly. "If dignity is jealousy to you, then so be it. But remember this, Charlotte. You may own the mirrors, but I own the walls they hang on. And without the walls, the mirrors shatter." The room fell into stunned silence. The chaos still lingered, but now it had shifted. The guests weren't whispering about failed catering or missing hotel rooms anymore. They were whispering about me. Michael's face twisted with fury, but beneath it, fear flickered. He finally realized the truth. He had never been in control, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I let myself enjoy it. The silence inside the resort's grand hall was heavy, brittle, about to snap. I could feel every eye on me, some wide with awe, others sharp with suspicion. Michael's face burned red, veins straining at his temples, while Charlotte clutched the back of a chair as if it could steady the unraveling world around her. Rachel sat frozen, mascara running in streaks down her cheeks, her hands trembling on her lap. I straightened my shoulders and signaled with a subtle nod. From the back of the hall, the wedding planner entered, pale and shaking, followed by the resort manager and the head of Elite Catering. Each of them carried a folder thick with documents. They didn't need instruction. They knew what I was about to do. I took the first folder from the planner's hands and held it up for the crowd to see. My voice rang sharp and controlled, slicing through the chaos. "This is the event contract for today's wedding. Every signature on this page belongs to Carter Resorts Holdings, my company, mine." The planner's knees nearly buckled under Charlotte's glare, but I kept speaking. I flipped open the second folder, this one from the catering company. And here, Elite Catering and Events, 55% owned by me. No food enters this hall without my authorization. I let the weight of the words settle before reaching for the final folder from the hotel manager. My hands didn't shake, my tone didn't falter. And here, Sunset Hospitality Group, 41% of their shares belong to me, which means every reservation, every block of rooms, every key card issued for this weekend ultimately requires my approval. Gasps broke out across the room. Some guests covered their mouths, others exchanged stunned looks. I lowered the folders onto the table with deliberate precision, then stepped closer to Michael and Charlotte. I own this resort. I own the catering. I own the hotel. Every signature here is mine. The words cracked like thunder. The planner, the manager, the caterer, all nodded quietly, their faces drained of color, confirming the truth. Michael's mouth opened and closed, no sound escaping at first. When he finally found his voice, it was hoarse with fury. "You're bluffing. This is some kind of stunt." The hotel manager interrupted, his tone respectful but firm. "No, sir, she speaks the truth. We were instructed to proceed under her authority from the beginning. Without Mrs. Carter's approval, none of this can move forward." Charlotte staggered backward, her hand gripping her pearls so tightly I thought they might snap. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, this can't be real. You're just trying to humiliate us." I turned my gaze on her, cold and cutting. "Humiliation isn't my goal, Charlotte. Truth is, and the truth is that you built your illusions on my foundation. You dismissed me, erased me, called me unworthy of standing beside my own daughter. But here today, every brick, every plate, every key is mine. And there's nothing you can do to change that." The crowd erupted in murmurs, whispers swelling into waves of disbelief and admiration. I caught glimpses of guests pulling out their phones, recording the moment. The story was already leaving the room, already spreading beyond the walls Charlotte had tried so hard to control. Rachel finally lifted her head, her tear-streaked eyes locking onto mine. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, the strength behind my calm, the dignity beneath my silence. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Still, the shift was there, in her gaze, in the fragile flicker of recognition that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Michael's voice cracked as he tried to reclaim control. "So what? You think this makes you the hero? You ruined my wedding." I cut him off, my voice slicing sharper than any blade. "Your wedding? This was never yours, Michael. Not the venue, not the contracts, not even the money you tried to steal. You thought you could erase me and pocket my investment. Instead, you've exposed yourself as a man too arrogant to see who truly holds the reins." Charlotte's face twisted, caught between fury and collapse. "All these years," she muttered, her voice trembling, "you were building this empire while I thought you were just a shadow." I leaned closer, my words quiet but lethal. A shadow can swallow the light if you ignore it long enough. The guests stared in stunned silence. Even the children fidgeting in their seats seemed to sense that something monumental had just been revealed. The Hayes family, once so smug in their control, now stood small and cornered, stripped of their illusion. I stepped back, letting the silence stretch, the gravity of the moment sinking in. My eyes swept across the room, locking briefly with Rachel's once more. For the first time that day, she didn't look away. The twist had landed. The truth was out, and there was no erasing it now. The silence that followed my revelation hung like a storm cloud. Michael's face was white with rage. Charlotte trembled behind him, and Rachel's eyes locked on me with something new. Recognition, maybe even respect. But I wasn't done. I took a step forward, my heels clicking against the marble floor, and spoke with a clarity that filled the hall. "The wedding can still happen, but only under my terms." Gasps rippled through the guests. Michael's head snapped toward me. "You think you can dictate this day? This is ours." "No," I cut in sharply. "This day belongs to Rachel, and if you care about her at all, you will listen. Otherwise, this event ends here and now. No food, no rooms, no ceremony." Charlotte's lips quivered. For the first time, her arrogance faltered. She turned to me, her voice breaking. "Please, Evelyn, don't do this. We've already lost so much face. People are watching." I didn't soften. Then let them watch. Let them see what true accountability looks like. I motioned to the resort manager, who still held the stack of contracts. He stepped forward, placing them on the table between us like evidence at a trial. I pointed at the pages. "These papers say I hold the power, but I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice, and justice has terms." Michael's fists clenched. "What terms?" he spat. I met his eyes, steady and cold. "First, you and Charlotte will apologize. Publicly. right here in front of every guest you invited to witness this perfect image of your family. You will admit that you tried to erase me, that you demeaned me, and that you were wrong." Michael's jaw tightened, his pride battling with panic. Charlotte let out a strangled laugh, brittle and bitter. "You want us to humiliate ourselves?" "You already did that," I said evenly. "I'm offering you a chance to salvage dignity." I turned to Rachel, whose face was streaked with tears. "Second, Rachel will speak. She will acknowledge her mother, not just as a guest, but as part of this day. She will say it aloud, where no one can twist her silence again." Rachel's lips trembled. She looked at me, then at Michael, then back at me. For a long moment she said nothing, but finally her voice cracked through the tension. "Mom, you're right. I let myself believe lies because I was afraid of conflict. But I don't want to be afraid anymore. I want everyone to know. You are my mother, and you belong here." The hall erupted in murmurs. My heart clenched, but I kept my composure. I turned back to Michael and Charlotte. "Third, you will pay $75,000 on top of what you've already taken. That money will go directly toward community programs under Carter Resorts. Real weddings, real families. No more using Rachel's wedding as a networking stunt to impress your friends." Charlotte's face drained of color. $75,000? That's robbery. I didn't blink. "It's restitution. You tried to take what wasn't yours. Now you'll give back more than you stole. Consider it the cost of learning respect." Michael slammed his hand on the table, his voice shaking with fury. "This is blackmail." I leaned closer, my voice sharp as steel. "No, Michael, this is consequence. You lied, you schemed, you humiliated my daughter and me in the name of your ambition. Today you learn the difference between control and power." Charlotte's chest heaved as she looked around the room, desperate for support, but all she saw were eyes, guests staring, phones recording, whispers swirling. Her perfect image was already crumbling. Finally, she sagged into a chair, her voice a whisper. "What choice do we have?" Michael looked at her, then at the sea of guests watching like a jury. His pride crumbled under the weight of exposure. He exhaled through clenched teeth, his voice low and bitter. "Fine, we'll do it." I nodded once, satisfied. "Then speak." Charlotte stood on shaking legs, her face pale, her voice trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have made mistakes. We disrespected someone who never deserved it. Evelyn Carter is not only Rachel's mother, she is the very reason we stand in this hall. We tried to erase her, and we were wrong." Her words cracked, but they landed. Michael's voice followed, sharp but subdued. "Evelyn, I apologize for everything." He forced the words through clenched teeth, but they were words nonetheless. The hall held its breath as Rachel rose. Her gown shimmered under the lights, her voice raw but strong. "This wedding is not complete without my mother. I want everyone here to know. I honor her, I thank her, and I claim her as part of my life. Without her, none of this would exist." Applause erupted, not just polite, but genuine. Some guests even stood. I let the moment breathe before delivering the final line, my voice steady and clear. "This is not revenge. It's justice." The words echoed through the hall, sealing the terms, binding the lesson. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of dignity restored, not stolen, not bargained, but earned. The hall that only hours before had been a battlefield now transformed into something else entirely. Under my direction, the staff returned. Not rushed, not frantic, but precise, professional, deliberate. Tables were reset with simple white linens, tall vases filled with desert blooms, and candles that flickered like quiet flames of renewal. There was no gaudy excess, no attempt to impress. The resort reflected me now, strong, understated, unshakable. Guests returned to their seats, their murmurs softening into anticipation. The chaos of the morning still lingered in memory, but what replaced it was reverence. They knew they had just witnessed the tearing down of illusion. Now they would witness something rebuilt on truth. Rachel appeared at the top of the aisle, her gown flowing like a river of silk. She was trembling, not from fear, but from emotion. For the first time since this ordeal began, her eyes found mine and did not look away. The officiant's voice began, calm and steady, guiding the ceremony forward. But before vows were spoken, before rings were exchanged, Rachel raised a hand, stopping everything. She turned, facing the guests, with a voice that cracked but did not falter. "Before this wedding continues," she said, her breath catching, "there is something I must say." Michael stiffened beside her, his jaw tightening, but he didn't dare interrupt. Charlotte lowered her head, her hands clutching each other so tightly her knuckles turned white. Rachel's gaze swept across the hall, landing finally on me. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke. "Without my mother, none of this would exist. Not this resort, not this celebration, not even the strength I needed to stand here today. I owe her everything, and I will never let her be invisible again." The words struck like thunder. A hush fell over the room, then a sound began. First a murmur of approval, then applause that rose and swelled until it filled the hall. Guests stood, clapping, some wiping tears from their cheeks. The applause was not polite. It was a roar of truth, a collective acknowledgement that the mother who had been erased had reclaimed her place. I stood at the back, my hands clasped in front of me, my expression calm. Inside, my chest ached with a mix of pride and sorrow. This moment had cost more than money, more than contracts. It had cost years of love, trust, and silence. But now, dignity was restored, not through vengeance, but through recognition. The ceremony continued, but it was different now. The words of the vows rang truer, the atmosphere heavier with meaning. When Rachel slipped the ring onto Michael's finger, it was not triumph, it was conditional, shadowed by the truth everyone had just witnessed. I noticed the subtle details, the way Michael's smile faltered, the way his eyes darted toward the crowd as though searching for approval he no longer held. Charlotte's shoulders sagged, her head bowed. Their humiliation was quiet, but it was total. They had been stripped of the perfection they worshipped, forced to bow before the very woman they tried to erase. When the ceremony ended, the applause rose again, louder, stronger, unrelenting. This time it wasn't just for Rachel and Michael. It was for survival, for justice, for the rebirth of something that had nearly been destroyed. Rachel approached me after the final blessing, her gown brushing softly against the floor. She threw her arms around me, her tears soaking my shoulder. Her voice broke against my ear. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. Thank you for not walking away." I held her tightly, whispering back, "This was never about walking away. It was about standing tall. And now you will too." Behind her, Michael lingered, his head lowered, his pride shredded, but not gone. Charlotte avoided my eyes entirely, staring at the ground as though it might swallow her whole. Their silence was its own confession. The guests, however, lingered around me, offering warm words, their eyes shining with admiration. They weren't praising wealth, they were praising strength. They had seen justice without spectacle, power without cruelty, and it had shaken them. The wedding, reborn in simplicity, ended not with illusions of grandeur, but with truth echoing through every corner of the hall. As I stood watching Rachel and her new husband walk down the aisle together, the applause still ringing in my ears, I knew one thing with certainty. They wanted me invisible. Instead, I became unforgettable. When the last toast had been given and the applause finally faded into murmurs, I felt the weight of the day settle over me. The chaos, the humiliation, the redemption, it all lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Yet in that silence, something unexpected bloomed. Peace. Rachel found me near the back of the hall, her gown trailing behind her, her face streaked with tears, but glowing with resolve. She fell into my arms, clutching me as though afraid I might vanish. Her voice trembled, raw with guilt. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was blind. I let him convince me that you were the problem. I should have known better." I pressed her close, my hand smoothing her hair the way I had when she was a child. My voice was steady, not soft but certain. "Don't be sorry, just be better. Learn from this. Respect yourself enough to never let anyone silence you again." Her tears wet my shoulder, but I felt her nod against me. For the first time in months, I believed she understood. Across the room, Michael stood isolated. The same man who once strutted with arrogance now wilted under the weight of exposed truth. Guests avoided him, their whispers sharp and cutting. Every handshake withheld, every polite smile absent. It was the kind of quiet exile that wounds deeper than shouts. His power, built on illusion and manipulation, had collapsed in a single day. Charlotte fared no better. The woman who once demanded the spotlight now shrank into the shadows, her pearls trembling in her grip. She slipped away from the crowd, her head bowed, not a word on her lips. Pride had been her weapon, but pride was brittle. Now in silence, she carried the fragments of her shattered image out the door. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their downfall was not my victory. It was their consequence. When the hall finally emptied, I stepped outside. The Arizona sun was melting into the horizon, painting the desert sky in streaks of gold and crimson. The resort, the very place they tried to use against me, stood behind me, steady and proud, my empire built on years of work, sacrifice, and resilience. I paused, letting the warm air wash over me, and spoke aloud, not to anyone in particular, but to the desert itself, to the ghosts of battles past. Respect isn't about grand gestures. It's about never forgetting who stood by you when others turned away. It's earned quietly, day after day, by loyalty, by truth, by dignity that cannot be erased. I inhaled deeply, the scent of desert sage drifting on the breeze. I thought of the girl Charlotte once was, humiliated at a wedding. I thought of Rachel, nearly broken by fear of imperfection. And I thought of myself, refused an invitation, erased from a celebration, only to return and prove that silence does not mean weakness. As I walked toward my car, the last light of the sun framed me in its glow. I didn't look back. Some stories don't end with revenge or triumph. They end with clarity, with lessons carved into memory. That evening, the Hayes family learned that money cannot buy dignity, arrogance cannot erase truth, and appearances cannot replace respect. And I learned that sometimes the sweetest justice is not in crushing your enemies, but in standing so firmly that they can never move you again. I closed the car door, the engine humming to life, and whispered one final thought into the fading desert sky. They wanted me invisible. Instead, I became unforgettable.